it's great to be able to talk. And I suppose initially when we got the email from Siobhan, we were like, no. We work a lot with people that are living with domestic violence and sharing parenting. And I guess then I was thinking of my research. I just did a master's last year, finished it last year, but I did my research around the effect of domestic violence on post-separation parenting. And it was an investigation of the lived experience of Irish mothers. So I just thought actually it might be good to share some of the findings of that with the group. So I know the pillar on discrimination that I fall under is family status and marital status, or family and marital status. So hopefully this falls a little bit into what you're thinking, Siobhan. I suppose for me, for the mothers who took part in the study, it's great to be able to share the findings. So I'm really just going to work through the findings that came up for me in the research. And I'm sure they're all things that you'll be nodding your head and are aware of. I'm just going to go out of it being a slideshow, because this always happens to me with slideshows. They just don't seem to work as good on Zoom. So I'll just do it this way.
And can I just say again, anybody that's not on mute, if they could mute themselves, that would be great.
Okay, I'm just going to move all of you over to the side. So I suppose I carried out the study, the research during the summer last year, so 2021, sort of over July and August. It was with a very small group of mothers. And the thematic analysis presented these as the key findings in the study, which were the prevalence of domestic violence and post-separation parenting. And there's some headings, I'll go through them in a few minutes. The impact of domestic violence on the mother, systemic barriers experienced by mothers living with domestic violence, and the availability of support and support services when living with domestic violence. So for the prevalence of domestic violence, the study highlighted that shared parenting was definitely a risk factor post-separation, consistent with research that found that the presence of children was associated with continued violence post-separation. 1/4 of mothers' lives are reported to be threatened post-separation by abusive ex-partners. And mothers reported fathers having little prior interest in their children, however, aggressively pursuing child contact post-separation. And that's consistent with research which claims that violent fathers see their children as emotional property with a sense of entitlement to them. The domestic violence was described as prolonged due to the nature of shared parenting, and mothers questioned why they left, comparing pre- and post-separation levels of violence. So in the italics are direct quotes from some of the mothers. You think getting them out of the house is the hardest, you think that is the worst, but it isn't. He got me in the garden and made conditions. You'll never be free, you will never go out, and I had to promise him. I naively thought once I was out, we left, that we would be fine, but it wasn't. The children were used as weapons against me. I was threatened all the time. It was continual abuse. So the personal acknowledgement of domestic violence. So in the current study, all of the mothers named the personal difficulty they had in identifying their experience as domestic violence. Mothers described feeling inadequate as their partners berated their parenting skills, believing the experience to be their own fault, which is consistent again with research describing women as internalizing and undermining, and the humiliation experienced in domestic violence, resulting in low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and feeling of failures as mothers. One mother described the difficulty in acknowledging her experience. It was harder because I didn't know at the time. I didn't realize that was domestic violence. I thought it was just me. I have to kind of learn to move on from this with self-care and not involve him in my head, so that the children don't have him living here when he's not actually living here. Victim shaming was another area that came up. So shame and the acknowledgement of abuse leaves mothers feeling unsupported in their choice to leave. The Worsley study of domestic violence found that women felt massive shame, feeling they had not succeeded in their role as wife and mother. Research indicates that society holds women more accountable for familial harmony than fathers, which increases the sense of shame felt by women. And O'Connor found a sense of shame affected how women disclosed their experience, with 2 in every 5 afraid to tell anyone. The victim shame and isolation were named by all the mothers as preventing them from seeking support or telling others what they experienced. Nobody knew what my life was like. There's still so much stuff that they don't know. There's probably so much stuff that nobody will ever know. They hadn't experienced what he did to me to get me to where I was. Still, they all still blame me for not walking away sooner. They don't see what you were doing with him in the first place. They just don't see it through your eyes. The second thematic area then is around the impact of domestic violence on the mother. And there's a number of core themes. And I suppose this is what I really wanted to look at. I wasn't want to specifically look at domestic violence, but the impact it had on the mother-child relationship and on mothering specifically. The parenting styles of mothers were keenly aware that the emotional impact of parenting with the prevalence of domestic violence had the power to change their parenting style from what they would like to offer to what they could offer. Mothers felt an urgency to protect children from any triggers that would bring children back to the abusive experience with their father. Mothers reported feeling a loss of control over their parenting, particularly when they saw their children reproduce their father's abusive behaviours. And this pattern of findings is consistent with literature that finds abusive ex-partners are likely to attempt to alienate children by blaming the mother. The children were described as so traumatized, leaving them with limited ability to cope with normal parenting and life events. My sister can give out to her kids. I can't do that to mine. What they have to go through, I don't put them on time out. It's hard. They're full of anxiety. My sister can give out to her 4 boys. I can give out to them, but X would break down if I give out to him. M2 described her children as very clingy. You know, they want to sleep on my bed and need that protection. She added that parenting is made difficult as you cannot disturb that safe place they have with you. Mothers described the guilt they have, which prevented them from using what they described as normal parenting strategies, instead trying to compensate for the experiences of their children. Child abuse. In the current study, 6 mothers reported that their children were abused, terrorised, and or manipulated in various ways post-separation by violent fathers. This is consistent with Morrison, who found that children are subjected to emotional abuse, such as name-calling, cruel put-downs, and distortion of their reality by telling of false and frightening stories. Further research found that children are left to feel responsible for safeguarding their mothers, as they often witness violent exchanges in which mothers are unable to protect them. And this in turn causes children to have a diminished capacity to see their caregiver as someone who can consistently respond to their distress and in turn can be relied on. Forced sleepovers every second weekend, the way the courts ordered, and the kids used to come home and tell me how they did not want to go again because they were locked in the attic in the dark. They didn't like the dark. The light was turned off and the downstairs door to the attic was shut. That's where they were left to sleep. That's caused trauma. He made a threat to my daughter. Daddy said he's going to come to the house and he's going to cut Mummy's head off with a saw, and then we will have to bring Mummy to the doctor. She saw birds sitting up on the roof of a local bank just up beside us, and she freaked. She said that they're Daddy's little birdies and he's going to hear everything I'm saying. Eventually, I managed to calm her down. Her dad had told her that his little bird is all over the place, and no matter where he is, he can hear what she's saying to her mom, and they will come back and tell him, and he will not be happy if she's talking about him. The erosion of motherhood. So Lapierre found that violent men intentionally and specifically target their partner's mothering, preventing mothers from being the mother they want to be. He found that men's attacks on mothering and the mother-child relationship are central to their exercise of control and domination. Elizabeth describes mothers as having painful limits placed on their mothering by violent men, while Melander reports that such behaviours on the part of violent fathers indicates to some extent how abusive men seem to understand how the institution of motherhood operates and can be used against women. All 6 mothers reported motherhood was intentionally eroded by violent fathers. So it was an absolute nightmare. It was a torture at every level. It was extremely difficult to be trying to be the best mother that you can have been put through every form of torture, intimidation, hardship. It was a nightmare. He took years of motherhood away. He took away years of joy with my children. Normal stuff was destroyed. The ultimate goal was to destroy me. The mother-child relationship. Child access was reported by all mothers to place them in an untenable situation, continuously forcing children into unsafe situations. This compromised the mother's ability to offer security, as children continuously sought reassurance. One mother described it as impossible for domestic violence to not impact on the mother-child relationship. This breach of trust and the inability to keep children safe can rock the very foundation of secure relationships. Implementing an authoritative parenting style which results in a successful child development is only achievable when there's trust between the parent and the child, respect for each other, and recognition of the child's needs and the ability to meet those needs. Van der Kolk found that a secure attachment is less likely when there's domestic violence, leading to children experiencing more authoritarian parenting. It is impossible for domestic violence to not impact the mother-child relationship, as you're hanging on by an absolute thinnest thread. M3 described how she carried on, but I wasn't there. She described herself as being an automatic. I was just going through the motions. She wondered now if they felt that or saw that, describing her children as not having a normal start, but that she tried her best. I really tried not to make them go. They made me make her go, and she doesn't get that. So maybe her opinion of me is damaged because I'm supposed to keep her safe and I couldn't. She will always bring it up with me. Something seems to trigger her and she would start asking me questions. And she would say, "Did you know Daddy was locking us in the attic in the dark?" Now, the older she gets, she questions, why did I let these things happen? So systemic barriers experienced by mothers living with domestic violence. The fear and control. Zioli found that mothers act strategically to minimize violence, leading them to use protective measures and agreeing to demands of violent men. Other research reports similar findings, indicating that mothers will find ways to manage the perpetrator's behaviour by monitoring moods and behaving in ways not to upset him. Francia reported that mothers are tethered to the court orders, enabling family violence to continue. And some of their mothers reported that courts failed to comprehend the impossible nature of sitting in a courtroom with a man they feared. Consistent with research reporting that survivors of domestic violence experience further abusive experiences in family courts because of the inconsistent and minimal provision of special measures to avoid them encountering perpetrators. All 6 mothers were driven by a sense of fear of feeling trapped by court orders, knowing they needed to comply with demands to safeguard themselves and their children. So every time basically we've gone to court on it because he can't accept, he'll just summons me again. I believe he gets a kick out of it. A big part of the reason why he has the access, and when he summons me so many times, it is the only way he can still try and control me. I think I've been summoned like 6 times by him in 2.5 years. So no wonder I broke down in November. No matter how much counselling I get, when he's too close to me, I'm afraid I don't think it'll ever go away. Family law courts. I'm conscious of the time, so I hope I'm doing okay on the time. Mothers described how fear held them back in the court. They felt the judge was blindsided by violent men, which Galanti describes as custody stalking, and using the court as a mechanism to control shared access. Mothers felt the courts had a pro-contact culture which favoured violent men and totally disassociated violence from parenting. Evidence suggests that the courts minimised the impact of domestic violence on women and children, in turn impeding their attempts to gain safety and protection. Mothers felt forced to trust in the system at the expense of their child's well-being. Research found that mothers are made to take responsibility for fathers' violence, with no acknowledgement of children being victims, resulting in the rights of children and mothers being overridden by the rights of the fathers to maintain contact. The overall experience for mothers in court was one of hostility and blame, with mothers questioned up and down, while fathers were given a slap on the wrist. This is consistent with research finding that mothers were treated like badly behaved children in the court. Participants reported the physical and emotional response they had when going to court with their ex-partner. He's there, he's so confident, head up. And when I go in, my voice goes, my legs shake, I'm so nervous. I just don't know what he will say. I'm so afraid of him. It doesn't go away. I still have that fear of him. How a judge thinks we can go into court with strangers and do this, but it's the hardest thing to do. Knowing I'm still afraid of him after all these years. I'm always scared of him, but I couldn't tell the judge this. I say yes to everything. The judge says, keep up the good work. He doesn't understand. They don't have a clue. The system is wrong. When I go up, I'm still traumatized. The lies he comes out with, but I don't get a chance to go back up and say he's lying. The judge is still looking down at you, and then he just says this is this and this is that. Can you work a bit harder on this? X is coming out, high-fiving the solicitor. Now I'm breaking down. I'm not even out the door. I'm a mess. I just don't understand. I will do anything to settle outside the courtroom now. We're really stuck. There's no help. The onus on mothers to protect and safeguard children. The current study found that two SLEN agencies perceived by mothers to protect and safeguard their children were ill-equipped to understand what ongoing access with a violent father did to mothers and their children. Past research has highlighted the numerous problems women have experienced violence, who've experienced violence face when they're in contact with social workers. The expectation that exists in professional practice, in particular social work, is one that women should protect their children from their partner's violence by leaving them, while also completely failing to support mothers when they do. The magnitude at which mothers felt failed was evident across the findings, creating a real sense of sadness for mothers. Everything being under their radar, but nothing meets the threshold. They don't want to see the safety issues. No matter what you go to them with, they listen, they say they're busy, they won't get involved, work it out with the solicitor, and the solicitor says go to TUSLA. I need support from somebody. Nobody gives the help. She, the social worker, doesn't understand the effect it has on me sending them. Mothers implied that in rural Ireland, fathers were given the benefit of the doubt by local professionals, which often resulted in ongoing domestic violence. And the final thematic area was the availability of support and support services in living with domestic violence. Mothers described how violent ex-partners had eroded their friendships and controlled any social networks they once had. This is consistent with Lapierre, who found that survivors of domestic violence reported that their partners had successfully isolated them from family and friends. Support systems can help to mobilise a mother into seeking change, which makes it understandable why violent ex-partners work hard at eroding social support networks, knowing them to be a threat. Early intervention and ongoing support were described as limited or non-existent in rural communities. I need support from somebody that's going to keep it on. Support access from services like Women's Aid, One Family and the Women's Refuge were seen by mothers as lifelines. I've been really lucky that I came across One Family because I was able to participate in an evening class. That realization that you know you're not the only one struggling every day. I would pick up the phone and really they're like heroes to me. They're for me and we check in weekly. I have a good chat. They just calm me down and they'll just make suggestions. Coping repertoires of mothers. Mothers describe being driven by a need to safeguard their children, which is consistent with Elizabeth, finding mothers are driven by a sense that they must protect their children. In the current study, mothers indicated how the reoccurring nature of abuse was so difficult with no opportunity to rest and heal. Harrison and Holt found that for mothers to rebuild their lives, recover their physical, mental and emotional health, confidence and parenting capacities and support their children's recovery after separating from an abusive partner, they need freedom from further abuse. When asked how mothers were coping with their situation, so how do I survive? I've no idea. I wish I knew because you could bottle it and sell it or advise other people, but I don't know. Staying busy while children were in access featured as a key coping mechanism for some mothers. One mother shifted her focus from believing change would happen due to the lack of support to focusing on what she could do. Concentrate on working on the kids, getting ready for the next access, not a great process. The requirement of dual consent. Brand found that children living with domestic violence often have psychological issues. 3 of the mothers returned to the court to gain consent before the child access supports. One mother said her daughter was suicidal before the court agreed to override the father's consent. There's little evidence in research of the challenges of dual consent. However, One Family and Rainbows Ireland both confirmed that dual consent is a real issue on the ground in children's support services. Findings highlighted that dual consent for children's support services often meant children failed to access support. Fathers were described as using this as a tool to return to court, and 2 mothers described having to go to court to get consent when their children reached dangerous levels. Last slide. So just some of the recommendations that came from the study were, that there needs to be further in-depth research to understand the prevalence of domestic violence post-separation in Ireland, because I guess a lot of people think it ends at the point of separation when we know it doesn't. The development of a national body with responsibility for all aspects of domestic violence to support the communication of the intersecting needs of the courts, TUSLA, family support services and families. So I guess it's that whole thing of Hester's 3 planets, we're all coming at it in a different direction. Mothers and children need to be heard, believed and supported when they recognise domestic violence and try to leave. Where domestic violence is named as a feature, the courts should give special consideration to child abuse and safe access. Develop support services focused on the psychological well-being of children, supporting the mother in her ability to support her own child. And recognising children as victims and training specialist staff within the judiciary, ensuring children's rights and needs are upheld and their voices heard. This would support a move towards safe contact and a shift on the onus for mothers to safeguarding and protecting children. None of them were pregnant, and the youngest child actually was 3, and they went right up to the oldest was 19. So no pregnant people, and they all had left over a period of years. Like, they weren't very recent, but they except the access was ongoing. That was the key thing.
And a follow-on question from that was, did women reference abuse in pregnancy in your research?
Yeah, a number of the women, but I'm just thinking of one woman in particular. She said that she really noticed a change during the pregnancy, where she was being berated a lot around, not looking after herself properly and not eating properly. And what was she trying to do? Like, was she trying to harm the baby before it was even born? And then as soon as the baby was born, lots more comments like that. Like, I remember her telling me that the father reported her and said she was feeding the baby salt all the time, and that's why the baby was sick. So constant niggling and badgering at her that started in the pregnancy but continued right through, and then just got worse, up to the point, I think the child was 3 when there was a violent assault one day, and she described the child lying on top of her, and like, he didn't fully obviously understand what was going on, but he was saying that he was telling the mommy that he was going to mind her, not let daddy hurt her anymore, and that was her trigger to leave, which is very evident in the research when you look at it. But the child is very cautious of her, because he thinks he has to look after his mom instead of his mom looking after him. But that was the turning point for her, that she had to go. Yeah.
And just a final question on that. Was there any inquiries, or did any of the women mention any inquiries from midwives or public health nurses after the birth of children?
No,
nobody mentioned
they weren't mentioned at all. Yeah, there was a real struggle for support in rural Ireland. Like, I was very fortunate in that the people were from right around the country. There's a lot of feedback coming there, I think, from Sylvia's. Maybe if people can mute.
If people could mute it, I think somebody has maybe got a speaker on it. Everybody could mute. That would be fantastic.
So the people in the study were right from Galway, Donegal, Dublin, Tipperary, Mayo and Kerry. So it was interesting as you went around the country, the different level of supports. Just, yeah, it was really difficult, but the nurses weren't mentioned actually.